afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. And it's my pleasure here to have a conversation with Catherine about product and her background. And we're going to try to make it a little engaging in two-way at some point. But I want to start off with your story, because I think it's an amazing story. Specifically, your path to Chief Product Officer is what I would consider maybe not as conventional as what we think of. And I'd love for you to walk us through how you kind of start as a business analyst or in that area in financial planning at Weight Watchers and end up the Chief Product Officer for a brand we're all very, very familiar with.
Absolutely. So my story, I did join Weight Watchers as the strategy analyst. It's basically the lowest pole on the totem pole when I joined. It was an internal strategy role working for the part of the business that was WeightWatchers.com, which was the startup within the Weight Watchers brand umbrella. And that internal strategy role ended up being leading FP&A, so financial planning and analysis. I was essentially in charge of forecasting the P&L for the business and working with each department on making sure what we were forecasting and investing in performed the way we expected it to. And it was interesting because in that role, actually I started out really scrutinizing marketing spend a ton, working with the marketing team and scrutinizing the CPA down to the penny. And then I had this moment where I was looking at our P&L and said, well, what about this product and tech budget? All these engineers we have. We keep saying it's going to drive conversion or drive retention, and yet in our absolute numbers, I was not seeing changes at the macro level. And so that got me really interested in the time in an FP&A role of digging in and saying, well, did any releases drive a financial outcome? And that actually led for me to get a little bit obsessed with releases that actually drove greater weight loss outcomes. So it was an interesting moment because I think Weight Watchers, the brand, originally thought of the product or what we stole as the program, which it is, points and the way that we teach people to lose weight. But we hadn't maybe as much thought of the way that what we wrapped it in as the whole product, that actually like the digital app and the experience and the way that we taught the information could actually drive better weight loss outcomes. And it was right around that time that my geeky FP&A self got into it that I was asked to step into this VP product role. But I went into product, at the time when I was asked to take on that job, my answer was, I'm interested in the job, but I don't know how the hell to be a product leader. I've never done it. What does it take? And in New York, actually, at that time, there were not a ton of digital product leaders. I actually did a LinkedIn cold call message, anyone who had senior product titles. Actually, a couple great leaders in the Valley and Netflix and so on answered me back and started to teach me. So that was my step into the role, and then my role grew to be all of the product and experiences for Weight Watcher.
Wow, and that's, I guess the other thing I was thinking of while you're talking is it's another great example of the whole digital disruption, how every industry is being, some digital components critically important, and transitioning and evolving from the point system to our digital application is really, really critical. It seems to be an interesting aha moment. Obviously you're analytical, you're passionate about conversion and financials. I mean, a lot of us talk about empathy in product management, and a lot of us, dog food our own products. Do you have passion for wellness, or how did wellness play into your life? You obviously took a job there. I was curious what your thoughts are on that, and was that important to your success?
It's interesting. I was originally in school, interested in pre-med. So I guess I was always interested in health and wellness and solving health challenges. So I did have a passion for it when I went into Weight Watchers. I do as a product person, I think everyone in this room probably agrees, the closer you get to the problem that you're solving, the more deeply you understand it, without assuming you're the customer, but trying to listen to people empathetically, the better that you are. So I did feel like, I had a deep passion for the customers we were serving at Weight Watchers. You might imagine, I was lucky because it's a fantastic product to learn how to do product through, meaning, first of all, it's a product, I'm teaching someone to lose weight. It's a very difficult challenge because everyone wants the outcome, but actually fundamentally doesn't really want to take the steps to get there, which means you have to get into a lot of gamification and behavioral economics for how do you teach people and get them to make those changes. And so I still have a deep passion for it and was lucky that that company let me learn some product skills that now I can port to any product. Behavioral economics and cognitive biases, doesn't matter whether you're an e-commerce company or an enterprise SaaS company, I guarantee there's some application of the principles that are the root of Weight Watchers in almost every product. And I constantly go back to that.
Yeah, if you can convince people to change their behavior regardless of what they eat, wow, you can change their behavior to do lots of things. So I can imagine it'd be super applicable. Now, you stayed there for a long time, and I mean, I believe it was over 8 years from at least my math, and that is probably atypical for our generation, and certainly for today. I mean, why? You know, I'm just curious, and would you recommend it to everyone? I mean, what's the value of staying someplace for that long?
If you had asked me that question when I first left Weight Watchers, I would have said no, do not stay at a company that long. Because when I first left, I went to then Shutterstock, and I feel like when I went into Shutterstock, I was like, wow, okay, my brain is really firing because it's a whole new set of problems and customer types. But looking back now, it honestly was probably one of the most valuable things I did when I reflect back on it now. And I think the reason why is because, first of all, when my journey there probably went through 3 different phases. So I'd see every 3 years I got the itch of like, should I stay here, which I think is human nature. But in going through that, it usually came from some kind of motivation of like, oh, am I advancing enough in my career? Or there's something happening in the company that I don't like, or people I don't like working with. There's something that usually is a reason that you start to think I should move on. And I guess what I found is by pushing through that, by actually staying that little bit longer, that 6 months or that year longer to push through, I probably learned the most through those step changes. And if I hadn't pushed through those tougher times, I wouldn't have learned, I felt like, as much as I learned. I also fundamentally believe, how many in the room, I can kind of see hands, have been at a company for more than 4 years? 4 years plus. This is actually great, so there's a lot of hands. I feel like you guys can probably relate to this. There's nuances within an organization that you can't possibly get until you've at least crossed the 3-year mark. There's nuances from you implementing things, seeing what things work and don't work, from having a different depth of understanding of your customers. And so I actually really recommend that people stay at companies longer than they typically think, because I think getting through the hard times is actually where the most growth comes in your learning curve.
No, it's true. It's true. I've felt the same way. Now, the interesting thing, like in your first 2 cases, you were the first chief product officer for both companies, the first chief product officer for Weight Watchers and the first chief product officer for Shutterstock. Do you have some special recipe for the rest of us to how to justify this title, or how do the rest of us get to be that, or is it the increased justification or importance of product? I mean, I'm kind of curious of how you did that. I mean, what's the secret sauce?
I don't think it was all me. I think I had some great tailwinds happening in the marketplace of obviously product being something that more companies that were, you could say, old school or more retail realized that they needed to make that evolution. And I hate the title Chief Digital Officer. So whenever that was put on the table, I'd be like, oh.
So why do you hate that? I'm curious.
No way. Oh, that's because it's like cutting the experience in half if you call me Chief Digital Product Officer. Like, oh, I only do this part of the customer experience? No, like my job, and actually sometimes I even rag on the type product because a lot of people don't know what product is. Like if you go in, when Weight Watchers, when my title was rolled out to, for example, the field organization, Weight Watchers has in the US alone 20,000 leaders who teach the traditional retail face-to-face meetings and classes. They don't even know what a CPO is. Like that doesn't mean anything. If you say product to them, they're thinking the physical products or goods. And so I used to have to say, think of me as our chief customer experience officer or chief member experience officer. And then they're like, oh, so it's the end-to-end flow. And I'm like, yes, it's the end-to-end flow, whether someone has an experience in a physical presence or in a digital presence, or they see marketing materials. I mean, I'm not the CMO, but you need to think of all those connection points. So that's part of it. I think I had the tailwinds of that, and that was the rationale behind the role at a company like Weight Watchers is a company that was really evolving. The only advice I have, which is, I think and earlier I probably was a little more focused on, oh, it'd be fun to get to the next level and keep having title advancements. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I thought about that when I was earlier in my career. But at some point, that technique stops working. My life would be, you can use that mindset and you will get to VP. You cannot use that mindset beyond VP. Your whole mindset has to change. And your mindset has to be one of really solving the most meaningful problems for the business and for your team. That's your whole mindset. So the way you get to the next title is you solve a meaningful problem. That can be the business need to change some financial trajectory or some customer outcome. If you solve that problem, the title will come. And you got to realize that if you're focused on that, it will happen, not just trying to get to the next level.
Got it. Now, I often say that product management is a sphere of influence role, not a sphere of control. I mean, very few product teams lead massive organizations. Maybe some of you out there do, but what I've seen is it's typically more of an influence role where your job is actually to influence a large portion of the organization, whether it's engineering or marketing or sales, et cetera. And it's interesting because I think influence is a critical skill. And now you've been the head of products and you're not, as technical as what, again, the industry thinks.
I'm not technical.
Yeah, I mean, that's at least what your background. No computer science degree.
You're technical. I am not.
I believe that I am, yes. And then there's other, reality is you're a female in a male-dominated industry, and you were, I think, young when all this was going on, by most measures. You're still young, not saying that you're not. So, how did you influence others, given these things stacked against you? Because I think that would be challenging.
Yeah, I have a lot of stories going to my mind as you say that. I think I totally agree it's a role of influence. That's a big piece. We all have seen that with just how you run a scrum team or how you run an org. The thing that I always thought about was kind of how do I make someone else look good? How do I add the most value to them? So, one story I'll say is when I first actually got promoted to be this SVP title, I ended up being the boss of at least 2 people who were my peers. We were originally all peers, product, UX, and content, and then they reported into me. And one of them was probably twice my age at the time that I was became his boss. And I could tell, you can tell there's some dynamic of that because everyone wants to grow and advance in their career. And my whole mentality was, how do I make him grow in the best way possible? Where does he want to go, and how can I help build those skills for him? And as soon as he saw that, and by the way, you have to really want this. You can't fake this. It has to really come from you really trying to help the other person advance. As soon as he saw that that was my goal, and that I was just trying to help him grow. For example, this guy ended up being a little bit lucky, but the skills that he really needs to develop was more financial acumen about the business, because there's a certain language. You either speak this language at the C-suite level or you're not in the C-suite level. So you have to speak the financial language if you're going to break through the top level. And he didn't have it. And so that was actually a skill I could teach him. And I think he knew that I could teach it to them, and then he was able to go on and advance his career. So I think if you just are motivated on helping other people get better and do stronger, it's kind of the best way to influence a group. My other wacky story on influence, which I think I shared with you once, was...
I love this story.
So I feel like there's a moment when you realize, like, you really have to step into your own leadership style, and that usually means really reading the room and trying to get people to feel a certain way. I can actually remember my mom telling me when I was young, people won't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you make them feel. And I think that's particularly true with teams. And so if you can change how people feel, that's probably the most massive unlock moment I've had in my career. So the crazy story that I have on this was, I won't say where, but at one of the places I was at, the site went down. We've probably all had that experience. So the site was down, busy traffic period, right? Because of course that's when it goes down. And so we're losing, we're like have a ticker mark of all the revenue we're using by the minute. And we have all the top engineers literally in a warm room, and everyone's on Slack and chatting and trying to figure it out. And as a product person who's not technical, I am the least useful person in that room. I am just dead weight observing the room. But what you could feel was the tension in the room of everyone freaking out. And I was relatively new into the role when this happened. And it's all engineers and all men, for what that's worth, but it was all men at the time. And I walk into the room and I'm like, okay, you're gonna take your headsets off, and we are gonna stand up and dance to music for 3 minutes. And I put the music on. And you can just imagine, like, the looks at me, like, literally, like, you are a crazy lady. Like, what? We are, like, no.
What
like,
song?
No.
I'm curious.
I put AC/DC on. So
AC/DC, okay.
And luckily, there were, like, 2 engineers who I was friends with that they, like, slowly start to stand up. But I made everyone do it for 3 minutes. The reason why is because when people get into a fear-based state, they're nervous, they're scared, they don't think they can solve it. You're actually not in your best problem-solving state. So there's actually neuroscience behind this technique. But they danced, and thank God, karma, whatever it was, within 10 minutes after, they hadn't solved it for 3+ hours, we had found the bug and we'd fixed it and the site was back up. But like that is one of those small learnings, by the way, as a leader. I was not comfortable doing that. I was like my internal monologue was, this is not gonna work. They're gonna think I'm crazy. I'm gonna have to leave the room with my tail between my legs. And you kind of have that moment where you just have to throw yourself into it and decide that you're gonna try this approach to try to change a problem. And that's just one example, but that probably is the biggest skill that you have of influence at some point.
Well, it's authentic. I think, as you said, if you care deeply about someone, if you're legitimately trying to help, then authenticity goes a long way. People can tell when you're faking it and when you're not faking it. And, so that's very practical advice for everyone. When next outage that occurs, just advocate dancing.
Tell me if it works, please.
It should actually rectify the problem in a period of minutes. So.
Spoken like a real engineer over there.
Yeah, and I gotta admit, if you asked me to dance, I would have,
pushed me out of the room.
It'd be very embarrassing. So, and we're not gonna make any of you dance. We did think about that, so, but don't worry. Well, so based on this, and so you ascended to the CPO role. You had multiple CPO roles, so presumably you could just keep doing that. I mean, and there's probably plenty of consumer brands or really well-known brands, both in the New York area and everywhere else, that would have glad to grab you and bring you on to help lead the product team. But you made this jump to the venture capitalist world, which, as Mike said, is although she's a venture capitalist, we still like her. So tell me, what was the impetus for kind of at the you're at a rise and a peak? Why leave and kind of start the learning curve over again in a brand new industry? Why do that? Why make yourself so uncomfortable?
Actually, you just in part ways answered it. I think I had a mentor who once said that the secret to life over like 25, 30 years of age was that 50% of the time you should be learning and 50% of the time you should be adding immediate value. And I had this moment where I was thinking like, well, I kind of have known how to do that. I could do this job, I could keep doing it, but what's gonna be a step change in my learning curve? And the really candid, honest answer is that in some ways this job was the job that scared me the most because I didn't know how to do it. It would have been easier to walk into other product or operating jobs, but being an investor, I had never done. I did not come from an investment banking background. As much as FP&A, yes, is finance, it's not investing finance, a different form. So that was the emotional component. The other component of it, so beyond trying to continue to learn in my own journey, was kind of thought about the impact. And this is probably the thing that sold me on the role in the end, which is that, I told you a little bit, I originally was pre-med. I had this great professor who said, as a doctor, you can influence this many patients. I actually got into public health policy and Weight Watchers because I thought it had this much influence and impact on the world, on a problem I cared about. And my aha moment with venture was, if I can be the investor behind a couple companies that are solving meaningful problems that I believe in and help use my experience to hopefully help them accelerate up the curve, I can impact hopefully several companies that can be billion-dollar companies impacting many people. That was what sold me. I made an investment in this company, Parsley Health, which is a new form of primary care. That's a great example because I believe that company could change everything that I think is wrong in healthcare over time. And so I'm very passionate about the mission and of that business, and that's a great example.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Is there...
Wait, can I ask you a question now?
Sure.
Let me throw it back.
Yeah.
Because, by the way, it feels like not appropriate that Todd's asking me all this. You've got such an amazing background. So I just told you the story about how I made the leap from kind of leading product teams into venture. I feel like you made your own amazing leap, right? From being a leader of product to starting your own company and being a founder, entrepreneur. Maybe just tell us a little bit about that leap for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been entrepreneurial for a long time. I think one of the interesting things about making the leap is one of the biggest differences about being a CEO versus being in an executive role, a product executive role, is actually sales is the area that I've learned the most. And I think it's, I remember when the first seed investor would ask me, have you ever sold something? And I was like, oh, sure, I've been on sales calls, yeah. No, he said, did you actually get the check? And I still kind of danced around the question a little bit. I wanted to project an air of confidence around it. But I can tell you, when I actually did it for the first time, it definitely something inside of me changed. And it was a lot harder than I probably thought it was. I gained a lot more empathy for the role. And as a product person, you're just getting all this feedback from sales, and a lot of us candidly are probably dismissing it, or we're probably making fun of them a bit, when they're not looking, and now when you own the number and you have so much responsibility around it and you feel very much alone sometimes at the end of the quarter, it changed my perspective a lot on the role and how I think about it in relation to product and business, and I think I've grown a bit from it, but you have to just put yourself out there, and it was super scary, and even now, the end of the quarter, I'm like a different human being. I mean, I literally, and my wife knows that she stays away from me. My kids know it now. My parents don't visit when it's end of quarter. They just know it's end of quarter. We will not see you. And even if I'm physically present, my brain will be somewhere else. So it's probably the biggest change, that happened for me. So. Well, going back to you, so I mean, as a product person that makes a jump to VCs, how do you think your background as a product person helps you vet companies and vet teams and vet ideas? I'm curious if you think it's a good path. Do you think product to VCs, should we all be thinking about our careers in terms of how we can become the VC next?
No, but what I would say is I do think the skill set is great for venture, because fundamentally product is about understanding technology trends and customer trends and staying ahead of that and finding product market fit. It's just that you're doing it usually within a vertical that is the space that you're focused on. So that skill set, I think, is directly applicable to moving into venture. That's what I'm doing all day long, is I'm trying to understand whether I believe the teams I see do have good product market fit. Now, we're early stage. We invest at Series A mainly and a little bit of seed in there. So that's what we're betting on, is whether we think a market is going to unfold. So product is a perfect skill set for that. I actually also think at product, it is, as you said, a game of influence. That is the only card I have as an investor. Now, FirstMark, we usually lead rounds, which means we usually take a board seat. But even in that, it's a game of influence. I do not have control as a board member over my CEOs or founders. I am a partner with them. And it's only to the extent that the dynamic and the relationship is strong that I can be helpful or influence or help to advise. It's a trust relationship. And again, that's a skill that I think you develop in product really well. I also fundamentally believe, our model at FirstMark fits the product background well, because we're at Series A, we do relatively few deals. So I think the other thing that maybe coming into the industry I didn't realize as much was, obviously there's so many different flavors of structure behind VCs, because a typical seed stage investor honestly might be making so many investments that they're not going to spend a lot of time at each company. I'm going to be doing 2 to 3 max deals a year for the rest of my career at FirstMark. So all the rest of my time while I'm looking at a ton of companies is trying to help those companies succeed, which very much feels like how I was motivated when I was leading teams.
Got it. So if there's one thing that the folks in the room, if they want to attract you in FirstMark as an investor, what do they need to show?
Great numbers. But the top thing I look for is actually proximity to the problem that they're solving. So as a product person, I'm so wired that way. I'm looking to see whether the founder and the founding team really understand the problem that they're solving. And I think everyone in this room can know, you can kind of tell when someone's bullshitting about interviewing their customers a ton, right? You can tell whether they've really gotten to that customer, whether they can relate to, it was Susan that I talked to on a Tuesday, and here's what her life was and her backstory. And I think that's kind of a secret sauce you get from being in product for a while, is you can kind of tell whether someone really understands the problem, the customer type. And that's something I try to glean very early on.
Good. And we have 1:30, so I think we may want to shift to our lightning round.
Okay, lightning round.
Lightning round here. So what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
You go first.
I think be patient. Some of the best opportunities I've had in my career, even though I've been super unhappy in certain circumstances, I've kind of powered through the uncomfortable, unhappy times, and good things have come out at the end. Just focus on doing what you're doing, deliver value, do great work hard. Good things typically come out. How about you?
Mine would have been to set personal OKRs sooner in my life. I do it now. Set your own personal objectives. The one that I did at one point was I didn't want to go pay for an MBA, and so I went and tried to get a free MBA while at Weight Watchers, which I did. Looked at the courses you learn in an MBA and decided I'm going to learn all those, but on the job. So setting some personal OKRs is amazing. You end up achieving a ton.
That's awesome. best book to read as of right now, your current opinion.
My now one is Michael Pollan. I loved his earlier stuff on food. He's written this new book on how to change your mind. I just think it's really fascinating and actually a good catalyst for how to think about your products.
I'll go with, actually, I'll shift to, I really like Shoe Dog, the Phil Knight story. I mean, like what an amazing read, very entertaining, and learned a lot about Nike. And favorite quote?
My favorite quote, which came from a fitness class instructor, Brian Ripka at Rip Fitness. It's a small gym in New York. But he said this thing during class, which is that courage always comes before confidence. And I heard that, and I rocked my workout that day. But then, that's my mantra, because I think it's so true. Like, courage always comes before confidence. You won't ever get to the point of feeling confidence until you make that leap and give it a try.
Good. And mine, I'll go with Simon Sinek, the guy, the Golden Rule guy. He said, customers will never love a company until the employees love it first.
Love it.
So, cool.
Perfect.
Well, thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.